So during the pandemic, I had a lot of free time on my hands, just like I'm sure some of us did too. Now, my entire life, I've always been super into everything computer and tech related. And so I spent the majority of my free time during COVID, sat at my desk, just messing around on my computer. Now, as we all know, everything that we do on our computers requires us to interact with one thing, our keyboards. And so since I was constantly hacking away at my keyboard basically all day, every day, I decided I was going to splurge on replacing my boring, beaten up old office keyboard with a brand new one. Now, as you can see, it's bright blue. It lit up every color of the rainbow and I absolutely loved it. But I had one problem with it, and it was that black cable in the top left. See, I really wanted it to be bright blue to match the keyboard. So what I ended up doing was I took that very cable to the back of my garage. I found the jankiest can of bright blue spray paint I could find, and I proceeded to soak this cable in paint until it no longer worked. Now, I was too embarrassed to ask my mom to drive me to Best Buy to buy a brand new cable for my brand new keyboard. So I decided I was going to learn to fix it on my own. And in the end, I actually ended up building an entirely new cable from scratch. So after a week of treacherously learning how to solder tiny data and power cables to an even tinier microchip, I ended up with this. Now, weirdly, I didn't make it blue, but that's not really the point here. The point here is that I made a working cable. I ended up posting this very photo online to some forums, and a few hours later, I got a few comments on my post. One guy asked me, "Where did you get this?" Another person asked, "How did you do this?" But most importantly, I had one comment asking, "Can you build me one?" It was right then and there as I read that comment that I realized I had an opportunity in front of me. And so I prepared to pitch to my dad the next day a business plan. A business plan that within 2 minutes of our phone call, he said he was willing to invest $100 into. Now, with that $100, I started a company called DefineCables.com, a custom cable making company. Now, within 5 months, I managed to turn from this, where it was making roughly $30 a week in sales, to this, where I had my products in the hands and laying across the desks of thousands across the world. Now, what I didn't tell you about this business was that before I started it, I was an unmotivated, video game obsessed teenager who had zero inclination to do anything other than his required schoolwork, let alone start an entire business. Now, unfortunately, there are thousands of teens who are in a very similar position to me. See, approximately 8.5% of teens are considered clinically addicted to video games. And if 8.5% seems high, well, just wait until I tell you that roughly 40% of young adults self-report their own addictions to social media. Now, don't worry. I'm not here today to tell you that social media and our devices fry our brains through continual dopamine hits, because I'm sure we've all heard that a million times before, and clearly it hasn't done much to help. We've all already reached a point where we are addicted to our phones. And so now this entire conversation has to shift to how are we going to put our phones down, and more importantly, keep them down. So what I'm here for today is to tell you guys why the shackles of our devices are so devastating, why they're so hard to break free from. And also I'm here to share some of the lessons that I've learned in my own experience in breaking free from them. So to kick it off, let's take it back to 8th grade me for a second. I used to come home from school every single day. I used to rush to my computer where I'd play a game or two online with my friends. And then I would reluctantly finish my homework I'd do the next day to make my parents happy. Right after, I was right back on my computer where I'd play until my parents had told me it was enough for the night. See, my parents were very, very vocal about how much they hated that I was wasting my own life behind a screen. And to be honest with you, every time that I had this conversation with them, a little part of me was like, okay, it's time to kick in. And I would focus up on an essay I had due or an upcoming test I had to study for. But that motivation, it never really seemed to last very long. Soon enough, I would be right back on my devices, just having fun with my friends. So why is it that I kept going back to my phone and my screens? Well, what I realized when I look back on all the times that I did was that every time that I failed at something, I went back to doing what was easiest, which was in this case, having a blast with my friends online. Now, for a second here, I'd like all of you guys to think about the last time that you struggled with something. What did you do when you faced some sort of adversity or reached a roadblock? While I'm sure there's a handful of us in here who are super disciplined and got up from our desks, took a deep breath, sat back down and got to work, it is very likely that a lot of us in here reached right for our phones to take a break. Now, this is quite possibly the worst thing that you could do in this scenario for two main reasons. The first being that break won't actually be as relaxing as you think it to be. See, while you perceive scrolling Instagram or TikTok as just a single part of your day, a single task for you to complete, your brain, it perceives each new post, each new photo or video that you see in that hour as its own individual task in its day. And so in that hour that you were aimlessly scrolling TikTok or Instagram, your brain went through this. Hundreds of individual tasks to comprehend. Now imagine trying to read all 100 of these SAT reading comprehension passages within just an hour. You can see why after you finish scrolling on your phone, you feel groggy or you feel drained. And you can see why after you finish scrolling, you won't remember a single thing that you just saw on your phone. Now, the second reason is a bit more complicated, but it basically boils down to the fact that social media has a performative nature to it. A performative nature that perpetuates failure as embarrassing. Failure. The same failure that you just went through. You just failed at something and then picked up your phone and put yourself in a world where failure is seemingly non-existent. If you think about your favorite apps, for example, it is always these extravagant, lavish hotels in foreign countries. It's the slew of fashion weeks across the world, or this guy who says he makes $100,000 on Amazon this month. But it is never the many, many hours of a 9-to-5 worked to pay for that ticket abroad. It is never the generations of connections and wealth that landed someone a spot on that runway. And it is definitely not the fact that this guy didn't make anywhere close to $100,000 this month on Amazon. See, this type of content, it finds success on these apps because it's curated. It's tailored to be perfect and hide the imperfect, which in a lot of cases is failure. And this is a big problem for us because failure for a lot of us can be a very effective motivator. If we think about us students, for example, while yes, of course, we are self-motivated to learn and better ourselves, we all can't deny that we fear showing a failing grade to a parent paying private school tuition, or even to friends who place social importance on being smart. You can think larger, think about employees. Employees fear failing at their jobs because it's going to get them fired. And so they work harder at everything that they do. More generally, people fear at failing at living a good life. And so they strive to experience all that they can in their limited moments. See, these reasons together are why we find ourselves stuck in such a strong cycle of coming back to our devices. If we think about the cycle for a second, well, we start something new. Maybe we pick up a new hobby, for instance, and we can find a little bit of success in that. But eventually we will face failure in one way or another. And when we face that failure, instead of deciding to push through it, we take an escape route. We pick up our phones and we drown ourselves in life after life of pure perfection. A life of pure perfection that we ourselves just failed at achieving. And so you can see how this might become a problem because every time that the cycle repeats, we dig ourselves a deeper and deeper pit of worry and despair, asking ourselves, why can't I be the one to find the success? And for me, this is truly one of the most disheartening things to see because I don't believe it's possible to be bad at finding success. But I do think we can be bad at dealing without it. Or in other words, we can be bad at dealing with our failures. Now, to prove my point here, I'd like to show you 3 individuals who I'm sure you all know. J.K. Rowling, Steve Jobs, and James Dyson. Now, what you probably don't know about all these people is that J.K. Rowling, her first Harry Potter book, was rejected 12 times from various publishing sites before it was finally accepted by its first. Steve Jobs, he was fired from Apple in 1985, 11 years before he came back to the company and proceeded to revolutionize tech as we know it. James Dyson, he went through 5,126 failed and completely trashed prototypes before he created the Dyson vacuum that we all know and love today. See, whenever people talk about failure, we've always kind of heard the same things, that we shouldn't fear failure. But I find it really hard to believe that nowhere in those 5,126 failed and trashed prototypes that James Dyson never asked himself, maybe this isn't going to work out. That he wasn't scared that his plans weren't going to work out. And so I think we have to shift this whole narrative away from don't fear failure to something else. We should fear not seeing the success that we could have should we decide to not push through the failures that we experience. So now that we've established that we're stuck in a debilitating cycle, how are we going to break free from it? How did I break free from it? I was 14 years old. I didn't know a single thing about running a business. I used to wake up every single morning and fail at the majority of things that I had to do that day. I would find a solution to all of it later on, and I would go to sleep and do it again the next day. Granted, some days I woke up and took wonky products photos and my problems had quick solutions. Other days I woke up to devastating product reviews that felt like the end of the world to me back then, and I had no clue what to deal with. So why isn't it that after all these failures that I experienced basically daily, that I never went back to my devices? Why is it that I decided to push through all of these failures? What I've come to realize is that for the first time in my life, this business showed me the true process of finding success. And now I bet you're asking, well, what is this true process of finding success? How is it different than normal success? And I'd like you all to think about getting a good grade on a test. See, you can study hours and hours and hours for your next test. And it is likely that you will do well and you'll get an A and you'll be happy with that test. But it is also likely that you will dread studying for that next test. And should you do bad on that next test, then you'll dread studying even more for that third test. Now compare that to the feeling of getting an A on a test after you just failed the last three. It is likely then that coming from a moment like that, you will have the motivation to push through failure again. And so should you fail that next test, well, it's no big deal. You learn, you grow, you adapt, you build off of that failure, knowing that success is possible on the other side of it all. So what this tells us is that failure is basically a prerequisite and is the central idea to this whole concept of experiencing true success. So to close off my time here, I'd like to bring you all to a different reality, one where I never even ran this business in the first place. See, it is likely that I would have spent the rest of COVID just messing around with my friends online, having a blast. I would have come to Andover and eventually found success in my school. But I don't believe that in my 4 years here, I would have found the motivation to do many of the major things that I've done, yet alone give this very talk. See, while yes, all these scars that I have on my body or all those failures that I told you about were hard to manage at the time, I don't regret a single thing about running this business. The only thing I would regret is never having had run it in the first place. And the reason for that is that this business was such a big force on my life. It has pushed me to pursue any and every opportunity given to me, hoping that one of these new opportunities will bring me as much joy and growth as this business did for me. So for those of you here today who feel that you are lucky enough to have avoided the detrimental impacts of our devices, I hope my talk today made you feel just a little bit more blessed to be in the position that you are in. And for those of you who feel that you are stuck, just like I was, I hope I inspired you just a little bit to seek out those successes and most importantly, keep at those failures, knowing that they can snowball into something larger. No matter which group you're in though, I hope you all take away one thing today: to pursue any and every opportunity given to you, because you never know what's going to get you going in a whole different way you never could have imagined yourself in. Thank you.